Welcome to Rappler Talk. I'm Pia Renada, and we're here with Dean Tony Lavigne of the Ateneo School of Government to talk about the upcoming 21st Conference of Parties to be held in Paris, France. Good evening, Dean Tony. So now we're going to talk about the highly anticipated UN conference on climate change, and a lot of Filipinos actually are not very aware of the significance of such an event. It's far off in another continent, and it's all about conferences, which not a lot of people understand really the nitty-gritty of negotiating on climate agreements. So can you just tell us what makes this summit different from all the other conference of parties that have been held before?
Yeah, well, this is the most important climate conference we are having in the last 5 years. At least, and probably the most important in the last 20 years. In other words, since this issue became important, because we're now at a threshold where if we don't decisively address climate change in the next decade, we're lost. When you say we will experience much worse than we've already experienced, Yolanda, that's nothing compared to what's coming if we don't address climate change in the next 10 years. So the importance of this conference is that it will lay down the path with which the world will respond to climate change from 2020 and beyond. And so for the Philippines, where we suffer climate change already now, we don't want to suffer even more and worse than what we're having now. The stakes are very high. We have to succeed in having an ambitious and effective agreement on climate change that will be adopted in Paris.
So other people also talk about this agreement being legally binding. What does this mean when you say legally binding?
It means that when you go to Paris and you agree to the rules that are set there and you promise to make commitments like you reduce your emissions and you say you will reduce emissions if resources are available for it. That means that when you come back here, you actually have to implement those commitments. So the Philippines made a commitment actually of reducing by 70% its business as usual emissions, means its emissions in 2030. We will reduce that to 70%, by 70% as our contribution to address climate change. That means that if there's an agreement in Paris, when we come back here, we better begin talking to each other on how we will implement that, how we will get to reducing those emissions. Of course, we said that we will do that if there's support available. So that's also important. You have to find out if there's climate finance. Developed countries who cause this problem, will they actually help us and put their money where their mouth is in implementing those commitments. But legally binding means that you're obliged to implement what you promised, what you committed to do.
Just like all the countries attending the COP, we're sending a delegation. Can you explain what the delegation is supposed to do during the COP?
Well, the delegation, the Philippine delegation in this case, is tasked with promoting, advancing, defending the national interest. That's our number one concern, and in a way our only concern. We have to advance the national interest on climate change. So the president himself will actually be there on the first day, at least on the Heads of State Summit. And the president himself in various speeches, when President Hollande was here, when President Hollande of France was here, when in New York last year, has laid down really what we would need to advance, which is we want an ambitious agreement, an agreement that will actually solve the problem of climate change. We want everyone to contribute to solving that, but we want developed countries to take a lead for that under the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. We will do our share, and we are doing our share. We have made this very ambitious commitment in our INDC, the intended nationally determined contribution that we have offered in these negotiations. So the delegation now catches the ball from the president. Make sure that in all of these meetings, there'll be 50 meetings going on at any given time, because there's going to be we're talking about a legal agreement, and the legal agreement would probably be around 25 pages long eventually. But right now we have a 60-page, 55-page, 54-page text draft. So we have to reduce that, and we have to make choices, and we have to make additions and deletions, things like that. So our delegation of negotiators will have to work with all the countries to get what we want, and to get things that we don't want out of the agreement.
How does the negotiation process work in terms of trimming down and sieving through the agreement to reach the agreement we want?
Yes. Well, the agreement is divided into various parts. So there's a preamble, there's an objective of the agreement, scope. Then the big issues are always mitigation, how do you reduce emissions by all countries, adaptation, climate finance is a big thing, what we call support finance, technology transfer, capacity building. So the negotiation is divided along these sections already that are in the draft text. And groups are created to actually then thresh out the remaining issues. But most of the attention will be on the Paris Agreement and the text. So it will be small groups, but small groups is actually like 100 people, 100 negotiators. And there we exchange ideas. We say, well, I don't like this sentence, and I don't like it for this purpose. No, yes, I like this sentence. This is actually a good sentence. Or maybe we can replace this with that. That word is wrong. This word is better. And in the exchange, we can find agreement. That's how it happens, right? Or we can then all agree, okay, this one is too controversial. Let's not deal with it. So it's a very tedious process for 2 weeks, which started 3 years ago, in fact, and now we have to make decisions. In the past, we didn't have to make decisions. We could always say that's an option 1, option 2. In some places, there are still 5 options available. We now have to make decisions. So for the Philippines, a very big thing for us, for example, is human rights. We want human rights to be integrated into the climate change agreement in Paris. It's in various texts. It's in the preamble, it's in the objective, it's in the decision. There's also, aside from the Paris Agreement, there's a decision that accompanies it that tells us what to do in the next 3 years to prepare for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Finance, we want a number. We want a commitment of X 100 million or X billion that will be given to developing countries, right? The developed countries don't want to give any number because legally they think they can't do that because it's binding their legislature, right? So we then have to figure out a way, how do we get a full commitment on finance, even without a number, even if the number is given in a political declaration. So we've been at it for a long time, actually, in trying to find a way, a language around finance that would make sense for all of us.
How about your loss and damage? Do you think, what is the Philippines' position on it?
It's a very big issue for us. I mean, we are one of the pushers, one of the promoters of the loss and damage. It's very obvious why loss and damage is so important for us, because we've been lost. We've lost a lot of lives and property, damage a lot, because of climate change. Yolanda, Ruby, Sendong, all of this happened actually, in fact, during COPs. And so it's a very big thing for us. And so we want it to be part of the climate change agreement as a way of recovering those losses and as a way of paying for those damage. The other side, the developed countries, they're concerned that it's opening the door to compensation, to their liability. Their position is, we're not liable for all of this. Of course, we want to help, but we're not liable. It's not our fault. It's nature's fault. It's whatever reasoning that it's everyone's fault, right? Because everyone does contribute, even if developed countries contributed more. And also big developing countries like China is contributing almost as much. Now, so we want to push for a straightforward, a strong mechanism on loss and damage in this, but they are opposing it.
Sir, my last few questions deal with connecting COP to the average Filipino or the average person. Why should the average Filipino care that there's a conference of parties happening?
Because the average Filipino is experiencing climate change now, will experience it even worse in the future. And if we fail in Paris, we would have failed the average Filipino, and the average Filipino would suffer a lot because Paris was a failure.
What's at stake for the Philippines, for the Philippine government in general, with this COP?
Well, the Philippine government has a lot of stake because it's seen as a leader in the climate change negotiations. The president is seen as a as a leader, almost visionary. Now with his speech in New York and with the commitment of a very ambitious INDC, I mean, there's this very strong relationship between President Aquino and President Hollande of France on this issue. So we have a lot of stake to get an agreement in Paris that we can be proud of. I am actually sure we will have an agreement in Paris after what happened in Paris a few weeks ago. The world cannot afford to be in disarray in Paris, right? I mean, in fact, that's why probably, in fact, more presidents are going to Paris than before, including President Aquino made the decision after what the attacks. I don't know if there's any relationship between that, but there's a sense that we have to be in solidarity with the French and with each other to combat the problems and the challenges of the world.
Sir, why are you optimistic that we'll have an effective agreement?
I'm optimistic we will have an agreement because world is large. I am not yet. I am on the fence yet whether it will be an effective agreement, but I think I would say that we have a fair chance, maybe a 60% chance, because people are, I think, feeling generous after what happened in the attacks of Paris, and I think people are seeing that if we don't solve this problem, I'm going to say people all over the world are seeing that if we don't solve this problem, we're going to be in real trouble.
Thank you, Dean Tony. Thank you for your time. Again, I'm P. Renada, and thank you for joining us here in Rappler Talk.